And I'm live. It is Gordy Canuck, otherwise known as Grimcazi, and you are watching a Canadian take on news events, Act One. And we're right now Sunday, the 21st of September, 2025, and with a hours-long memorial service that took place in Phoenix, Arizona, State Farm Stadium, I think is the name of the venue. It's where the Arizona Cardinals play their NFL football games. That was the location of the memorial service. I scanned over it. I didn't watch the entire thing. And it was broadcast on YouTube by Turning Point USA, by their YouTube station. And I think there was something like 9 hours of coverage. Who's going to watch 9 hours of coverage? Uh, there's just too much happening in the world. I imagine there are some, though, that did. Some will have taken in the entire thing. I did take note of the luminaries who took to the podium. It started off, I did listen to all of Pastor Rob McCoy. Charlie Kirk had been an attendee at his church in Thousand Oaks, California. I'm not sure when Charlie Kirk started attending that church, but he was attending it back during in 2020 during the COVID insanity. Rob McCoy was one of the lions who defied so many of the lockdown orders imposed in the state of California. It was unreal. For me, a Canadian, it strikes me that the government overreach in California was pretty much akin to what we saw in my home province of Ontario. And I watched all of his address, and I have some thoughts on it. The one thing I didn't like about Rob McCoy's address is I, I'm not a fan of tech. I'm not a fan of technology, and seeing at what I will call an altar call, there did appear to be something similar to an altar call take place at the end of his address, which was only probably less than 10 minutes in total. Um, and he invited anyone who had not made a profession of Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior to stand. He asked everyone who is a professing Christian to remain seated, and for anyone who has not yet invited Christ into their heart, believing in their heart and confessing with their lips that Jesus is Lord, to stand up. And then the screen that they had, the Videotron, whatever, displayed a QR code. And he said he would invite those who were seated to scan the QR code, and then they could walk through those standing a profession of faith. And I that just doesn't sit well with me. This marrying of something that's supposed to be personal with a QR code anyway, but maybe I'm alone in that. I don't know. But there were also several other, it was a who's who of the Trump White House. There was Robert Kennedy Jr., there was Tulsi Gabbard, there was Pete Hegseth, there was Marco Rubio, there was Donald Trump himself, obviously. And I just scanned through a little of it. I did notice that the worship songs, the music, there was Phil Wickham and there was Chris Tomlin, who are two Christian artists that I enjoy listening to. And talk about a marathon. But before I get going, I'm going to jump right into the comments because Brett Skinner showed up right off the hop, and he brought something up that I hadn't thought about. But his first comment was that talking about how they're now saying, "Oh, I jumped ahead." Uh, his first comment, Brett's first comment. Brett is an American from the great state of Wyoming, and what Brett wrote, he said, "If you're following the storyline, things are not adding up." FYI, for your information. And I think what he might be referring to is Candace Owens, Owen or Owens, I think it's Owens. She has put out content and dissecting the text messaging that has been released by the authorities and noting that it doesn't include timestamps and juxtaposing it with other footage of this killer, Tyler Robinson, or the alleged killer, Tyler Robinson, standing, I believe, in a McDonald's and suggesting that the timeline doesn't quite add up. And we live in a video surveillance world right now. And after a major shooting, campuses have security cameras all over the place. Everyone's holding up video cameras. And how is it that we don't have any footage of this alleged shooter, Tyler Robinson, sitting in his car, supposedly texting his lover, whatever, texting back and forth, and basically issuing what is now being presented as something of a mea culpa, something of a guilty admission, not something of a guilty admission, but de facto an admission of guilt. And uh, amongst all this, these stories floating around, the one pervasive thought I keep coming back to is I'm praying, honestly, praying that Tyler Robinson, that he goes to trial. I am fearful that we're going to see a situation like happened down in Dallas, Texas, after John F. Kennedy's assassination, where Lee Harvey Oswald was taken out by Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner with apparently all sources reportedly contend that Jack Ruby had known connections with organized crime, with the mafia. And then, of course, more recently, you have Jeffrey Epstein, who was found in his cell, unalived, and the contention is that it was done at his own hand. However, the video surveillance, well, the cameras just conveniently turned off, and the individuals who were charged with watching, monitoring Jeffrey Epstein were derelict in their duties and just rather conveniently. So we just have to accept the word of the authorities that he unalived himself at his own hand. Personally, I do not believe it. It is just too far, too convenient. And my biggest fear, I want to see Tyler Robinson go to trial. I would have wanted to have seen Lee Harvey Oswald go to trial. I would have wanted to have seen Jeffrey Epstein go to trial. Well, and goodness knows, I don't know when hearings and the actual court case is scheduled to take place, but so much can happen between now and then. So, anyway, then Brett Skinner went on to say, um, he writes, talking about how they are now saying his bones stopped. And then he gives a 30.06, the caliber of the round. Uh, he believes that's 100% bull. Uh, and he's writing that bullet would rip through a grizzly bear or a bison, but not through a human body, not through the body of Charlie Kirk. The only thing is, I am no expert on ballistics. The military crest on my T-shirt notwithstanding, this is 5th Field Ambulance, 5th Mechanized Brigade Group, Canadian Armed Forces. I was posted to Valcartier for a number of years between 2011 and 2015. But I worked in a medical unit, and I was the radio guy. I am no expert on ballistics in any way, shape, or form. But just as strictly a layman, I have to recognize that I've been on the firing range, and I know that bullets decelerate. So when you fire from 200 yards or in that neighborhood, its speed leaving the chamber and, you know, is not the same as it is on impact. And I know that in life, stuff happens. And I'm not going to point, Brett, this directed specifically at you or anyone else, about lack of an autopsy and what they're saying. But I do know that in stuff does happen. And so reading on, Brett is saying, if it was your family member, would you release an autopsy report? And I'm just pointing out it's no big deal, but you spelled report or autopsy wrong, but big deal. Not taking issue with that. It's not the most common word in the world. But at any rate, I was right after you made that comment, I decided before going live, I'd do a little checking. And autopsy reports, according to what little info I've sourced to this point, autopsy reports don't come out right away. They don't, it takes time for autopsy reports to come out. It's one of those things where at this point, I am not dismissing any of the conspiracy theories that are out there, as evidenced by my previous videos. But at the same time, uh, I'm kind of operating in a space right now where I'm willing to give a little bit of benefit of the doubt, with respect. I want to see how things fully shake down. I expect we're going to be finding out more things in the days and weeks ahead. And again, I pray that Tyler Robinson, the alleged gunman, that he actually does go to trial. Uh, and in terms of would I want an autopsy report released to the general public, it would depend. It would depend. I don't have a blanket answer to that question. It would depend on the contents of that report. It would depend on the context of love, my family member's death. It would depend on the degree to which they are a public figure. And currently that I'm aware of, no one in my family is a public figure. So that's a question I can't inject myself into. So let me go through the rest of the messages so far. And Eat Me, who is also known as Nancy, is here, as is Danny, both of whom are moderators on the live stream, just to keep things clean. If you are commenting in the live chat, I enjoy it. I appreciate it, and I encourage it. But I simply ask that you be respectful. I ask you not to engage in no F bombs, a little bit of profanity. I will say things like that bugs my ass. I will use light profanity, but no F bombs, please. At any rate, everyone's wishing everyone else a good evening. Good evening to Danny, to Nancy, again to Brett Skinner, and anyone else. I notice that there are a number of people watching live stream right now. This is hot news, and a lot of people can't get enough of it. And Danny's telling me that he watched all 9 hours. He watched it like I did on the Turning Point USA YouTube site. I did not watch all of it. I watched enough of it to know who was speaking. And as I said, who's who of Trump's inner circle: Hegstead, RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, a few people who, as I was scanning through, I didn't recognize and didn't care to go and dig and find out who exactly they were. I'm sure there will be reporting on it. Now, Brett Skinner is writing again and saying, very possible because the story is so ate up, Tyler will get off. And then he has the rolling eyes emoji. I'm not sure exactly what to make of your message. We will see what happens. It needs to go to trial. And Eat Me has taken note of what Candace Owens came out with respect to McDonald's and the video, very odd. And Danny's echoing that and saying things that make you go, hmm. And Danny is ending off, and this was certainly a theme of the Charlie Kirk's memorial service. It was very much like a Christian worship service, and that's to the good. QR codes or not, notwithstanding QR codes, I was very pleased to see the gospel message being so loudly proclaimed. And as a matter of fact, I believe that Erica um, Kirk, the widow, Charlie Kirk's wife, that she encapsulated the gospel good news of Jesus Christ when she invoked the words that Christ spoke on the cross and that Stephen invoked when he was being stoned to death in Acts chapter 7. And he said, both Jesus and Stephen said, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And then she invoked that same passage, those same words in relation to, if it is indeed to the one who pulled the trigger and took the life of her husband, she she forgave him. And if you want, that is the essence, that is the heart, that is what the gospel good news of Jesus Christ is all about, because we're all broken, we're all fallen, we're all sinful, we've all missed the mark, we all deserve eternal separation from the goodness of God. And it's through the loving sacrifice of Jesus on that cross that we are reconciled to a perfect and holy God. Forgiveness is the heart of the gospel. And seeing her forgive the shooter is unbelievable. As for the stuff with respect to the so far lack of an autopsy and the explanations were being given as to there being no exit wound, and Brett seems convinced that an exit wound with that caliber of rifle, with that caliber of ammunition, that there should definitively, absolutely 100% be an exit wound. There's all kinds of speculation out there. I'm seeing all kinds of content published by individuals who are presented as being Army Ranger, Navy SEAL, um, marine ballistics instructors. There are all kinds of experts out there, and they're not all agreeing. They are not all agreeing. And who's right? And here's one of those times where I'm going to drop a light expletive. Sometimes shit happens. Yeah, it's when things start to stack up that I start to question things. I mentioned it in previous videos about 9/11. If the only question was why weren't planes scrambled to intercept those four planes that had lost complete radio contact with the control towers, and standard operating procedure says that within 30 minutes is a reasonable time frame, that you'd have fighter jets scrambled and flying alongside them. And that did not happen on 9/11. But if that was the only thing, it would be easy to say, well, shit happens. Or if the only thing was that they found one of the supposed hijackers' passports, if that was the only anomaly, if that was the only questionable thing, well, okay, shit happens. Maybe, something incredible happened that allowed that passport to survive that massive fireball. Shit happens. Maybe it got blown out right away. Hey, you know, but there were, in the case of 9/11, it's more like not one, not two, not three, but we're talking dozens of things that just don't add up. You take them in isolation, which I've seen people do. They can shoot down each one in isolation, but they stack up. And the explanation for each one in isolation is always, well, weird things can happen over and over and over and over and over and over again. No. So we'll see how this plays out. Max Power has likewise shown up. I forget where Max is from. I think you're in Alberta or something, but I forget. And I always appreciate people letting me know where they're from. Like I know from previous videos that Brett Skinner is from Wyoming. And I know that Danny and Eat Me, aka Nancy, are from Montreal, Canada, Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Um, And I got it right. Max Power is in Alberta. He is in Edmonton. Anyway, um, Danny's writing, they were already in the air doing a military. Yeah, there's always excuses as to why for the anomaly. Well, it just so happened that we were engaged in a military exercise. And as a matter of fact, at the time of 9/11, on that actual day, there were simulations of of that basic exact event. I don't want to make this video about 9/11 and all the questions on that. Uh, let's see, Max is writing. I also think that the text messages from the shooter are strange. I agree. I agree that they are strange. I've never seen anyone use words like retrieve and vehicle in texts. Typically, texts are short. You want to keep them short. Um, and so my memory sometimes it's great, sometimes it's horrible. Um, as a matter of fact, I did not go into work on Friday, just passed. And when I called in, I couldn't remember the name of the individual who manages my department, the department I work in, the guy I had to speak to. His name went right out of my head. Couldn't think of it. Uh, Weird things. I woke up Friday feeling, ugh. Anyway, um, now the more contentious and the more difficult thing to discuss, but I'm not averse to discussing difficult topics. As a matter of fact, I had one final thought and I'm weighing this in my mind. Do I share this thought that I had about Charlie Kirk's memorial? And it's not a positive, it's a negative, but it is a thought on my mind. And maybe I'm not the only one who has had it. And so I'm going to put it out. I'm going to put it out there. I imagine I'm not the only one who has had this thought, but I imagine I'm one of the few who would be willing to express it because it's not nice. And this is a contentious time. And I don't mean to be mean, but I can't help what I was thinking. As I watched Erica Kirk, notwithstanding the fact that I love that she made a public pronouncement in forgiving the killer of her husband. That I thought was amazing. But the manner in which she did it, two words came screaming to my mind, and I'm going to say them and I'm going to leave it alone unless people want to comment, and then I'll expound. But the two words are drama queen. And I'll just leave it there. I'm not a fan of drama, but we live in a dramatic world where everything gets blown up. What's being said? Max is saying it makes me think of that scene in Minority Report movie that I've seen that's with Tom Cruise. Minority Report, where the detective finds an orgy of evidence when it's too convenient to find every piece of evidence you need to convict someone. I actually don't remember that scene, but whatever the case. And we have DNC Productions here. That's an interesting username. My DNC, I usually take as the Democratic National Committee, Democratic Party. Who knows though? You can make up any username you want on YouTube. I can be, president. I can be king of Canada if I want. DNC Productions writes, uh, okay, taking exception to what I said, those words, drama queen. And that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Um, and Danny agrees with something, perhaps agreeing with DNC, I'm not sure. And then Max Power is writing, liberals are trying to pass another hate speech bill. I have seen this. And my first read through of it, I I don't have any glaring concerns at the moment, but that can change because I haven't gotten into the devil is always in the details. And my fear is that right now it appears like they want to protect individuals going into community settings, going into churches, going into places of worship. And hey, who could be against that? My fear is that it'll evolve or that there are elements to it that will include language that offends. Well, you offended me with those words, and so that's hateful. Well, if we want to discuss anything meaningful in this world, you have to be willing to risk offending, and you have to risk being offended yourself. It's time to grow up and put on your big boy pants. But anyway, going on. Um, Amy says that she has not watched any of the memorial service, um, and is saying, let Charlie Kirk rest. There's a lot of effort being employed to capitalize. I will say this, politically, there's an effort being made by the Republican side, the conservative side, to capitalize on Kirk's death. And likewise, subject line to this video, I said I wanted to talk about Charlie Kirk and Israel. What did I write? And more, and anything else that wants to come up, and there's more coming up. Always does in the live chat. And Israel is trying to capitalize likewise on Charlie Kirk's death. I have seen Ben Shapiro has basically offered or is saying that he is going to pick up where Charlie Kirk left off, and that he is going to start doing similar type campus events, and prove me wrong, debate me. And personally, I think that is a bad move. um, Ben Shapiro is not Charlie Kirk. I'm not saying Ben Shapiro does not have a sharp mind. I'm not saying he's not Charlie Kirk's intellectual equal. They're both very sharp individuals, but Ben Shapiro being a yarmulke or kippah wearing Orthodox or at least a conservative Jew, it's not going to go well. And any rate, let's read on. Uh, Danny is agreeing with, I assume, me on something. Um, Eat Me is saying, is what I'm thinking these days. His death is being, and she's agreeing with me about his death being politicized. Everything, the sad reality is that in today's world, everything, everything is political. The health care is a political issue. Gender is a political issue. Sexuality is everything is a political issue in today's world. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but not much. If you can politicize anything, it will be politicized, and people will try to gain advantage from it. Now, I'm hearing these stories. Danny is writing down that Charlie Kirk turned down $150 million from Israel a few weeks before he was shot. Um, I'm hearing a lot of, I heard someone close to Charlie Kirk say this. We're getting the game of telephone. And if it confirms a bias, there's a tendency for people to want to believe it. And Israel right now, they're losing the propaganda war with the Palestinians. Hamas and associated Palestinian groups are absolutely 100% winning the propaganda war right now. And that's not to say that Israel is not engaging in propaganda as well. They are. I've said this many times. In conflict, in war, all sides use propaganda. But right now, Israeli propaganda is falling flat. Palestinian propaganda is riding high. People are willing to accept the Palestinian propaganda as truth, and they look at the propaganda coming out of Israel and they say that's a lie, that's garbage. And it typically will break down based on where one's biases are, and we all have biases. And I have been doing my best to challenge my pro-Israeli bias And in point of fact, I'm willing to walk things back a bit, not entirely. And actually, I have a Bible verse all picked out for how, how my attitudes have changed, but not entirely. All right. But before I get to my Bible verse, and if anyone wants to go there, it's right at the end of the book of Genesis, first book of the Bible. It's chapter 50, last chapter, verse 20. So if you want to pull out your phone and get it up, or if you want to pull out I prefer having a physical hard copy of the Bible. Uh, Max Power is writing, I also hate to notice this, but Kirk shooting coincides with a vote in the US to block the release of the Epstein files. I have heard this as well. And you're saying that nobody is talking about the Epstein list anymore. Actually, a number of people are. A, a number of people are. A number of people have made note of what you said, and a number of people have made note of the fact that, or rather, Charlie Kirk has spoken, or had, past tense of the verb, sadly. Charlie Kirk had spoken about the potential for an Epstein Mossad connection. And these are all 100% absolutely legitimate questions to ask. In espionage circles, from what I understand, um, there is something called a honeypot scheme, or a honeypot. I don't know what scheme. I don't know another word to use for a honeypot operation. That would be another way to put it. And that would, wherein you compromise an individual. And when you've compromised them, then you own them. And if you're caught on tape having relations with a minor, now you talk about the potential for blackmail. You better do what we say. It was one of my favorite all-time movies. Everyone knows I'm a big fan of the Godfather saga. Godfather 1 and 2, Godfather 3, not so much. But in the Godfather 2, Senator Geary, um, state senator for the state of Nevada, is putting the screws to the Corleone family. And then shortly thereafter, he goes into a house of ill repute. He goes and he avails himself of the services of a woman of the night in a brothel, and she ends up dead. And who's there immediately to clean things up? Hagen, Tom Hagen, the consigliere, the legal voice of the Corleone family. And he, this would be a career ending scandal. Gary could lose his position, his family, he could lose everything. But the Corleone family is there to make things right so that no one ever finds out about this, but they know. And now Gary knows that if he doesn't do the bidding of the Corleone family, that his life as he knows it is over. And so he becomes compliant. So let's read what's being said before I get to my Bible verse. Eat Me is writing that she saw a church where the pastor used AI to recreate Charlie and put words in his mouth post mortem. I'm not anyone who's been on this channel before knows I am not a fan of AI, not in the least. I do my best not to interact with it. However, I have to acknowledge that I recognize that AI is becoming pervasive in this world. And whether I want to or not, I am interacting with it. It happens every time I just want to search something out on Google. By more than half the time, I get Gemini, which is Google's AI assistant, providing me with what I used to get off Wikipedia or some other site. And I will have to say that pretty much all the time, what AI is giving me is right, is correct. but I still don't like it. Um, so I'm trying to read through. Uh, Eat Me is thinking similarly to Max Power about something. And then Brett is writing, how about Europe now recognizing Palestine as its own state? I was just reading about that. And what are the three? It's England, Canada, and Australia, I believe. UK, Canada, Australia recognize Palestine as a state. That was reported within the last hour or so by the Washington Post, although it happened much earlier. This is when they wrote the article. So it's relatively new. UK, Canada, Australia are recognizing Palestine as a state. It doesn't have any tangible meaning right now because Palestine as a political nation entity doesn't have any borders, doesn't have a leader, doesn't have a governing structure. This is symbolic, what has happened so far, at least politically. We'll see if it means something down the road. We'll have to remember that Israel itself declared itself a nation state on May 14th, 1948, but that likewise, and they received recognition pretty much immediately from Harry S. Truman, the US president at the time, uh, a Democrat, incidentally. So Truman recognized, but so did the Soviet Union, so did Iran, so did Cuba. A number of countries around the world recognized Israel's declaration of statehood. However, it didn't have any meaning for about 8, 9 months until Israel had managed to sign armistice agreements with Egypt, with Jordan, with Syria, with invading armies from the Arab League who were seeking to grab the former British Mandate for Palestine. They were looking to grab it and add it to their countries. And Jordan did grab some. Jordan did get a hold of the western bank of the Jordan River. They added that to their country. They grabbed East Jerusalem and were thrilled over the fact that for the first time in over 1,000 years, there are no Jews in East Jerusalem. Uh, and Egypt managed to take hold of the Gaza Strip, and they added it to their country. Uh, and now, it's curious. Um, the western bank of the Jordan River, some call it the West Bank, Israel calls it Judea Samaria. The western bank of the Jordan River went from being went from being an Ottoman holding to a British holding to a Jordanian holding to a holding of Israel. They occupy it now; it's theirs, and it's been a holding of one country or another. But now, for the first time, maybe if some future Palestinian state is declared for the first time ever, there would be an actual nation state of Palestine, and it's looking like the idea is to marry it, to join it with the territory of the Gaza Strip. We'll see what happens. Um, I'm just going to read on the messages and then I'll get on to my passage and talk about my evolving thoughts with respect to the nation state of Israel. Uh, just trying to catch up. Uh, Max Power is writing that at least two US presidents are closely associated with Epstein. That would be Trump and Clinton, I'm assuming. How is there no client list and can't find anyone the children were trafficked to? It doesn't add up. No, it doesn't add up. We keep being told nothing to see here, folks. Look over there. Look at Charlie Kirk's assassination. Look at what's happening in Israel. There's always something out there to and I almost get the feeling that whenever Epstein starts cropping back up, that more bad things are coming. Like if all of a sudden the hue and cry for, a further investigation into Epstein, if it starts building up again, that we're going to see another event, another so-called black swan event. Black swan being a negative event. It's kind of a Wall Street term, but um, Max goes on to write, if these powerful people are being blackmailed, then we do not have a democracy, and all our leaders serve the blackmailers, whoever they may be. The only way that blackmail is defeated is that you have to call their bluff. Go ahead. I'm a broken, fallen, sinful person. Yeah, I've done bad things. And you've got to be willing to give it up. That's the only way you can defeat blackmail. It's the only way you can defeat it. Otherwise, you're just going to keep giving in, giving in, giving in, giving in, giving in. And then uh, Max getting on to the Godfather saga, again, one of my favorite movies. Um, I scrolled too far. Sorry about that. Max is writing the blackmail scene with Tom Hagen in The Godfather also reflects a long history of this honeypot scheme operation being done. Even goes back to ancient Rome and ancient Greece. Absolutely. Blackmail is nothing new. Blackmail is nothing new. And intelligence agencies probably do this. Absolutely. The Kremlin, the CIA, you name it. MI5? Absolutely. Agents, double agents. How do you turn someone? This is how it's done. This is how it's done. One of the ways. There are other ways as well. Uh, Brett is writing, Danny, is Canada and Europe going to save Ukraine? Oh, and there's another distraction, the Ukraine Russian war. Danny thinks that AI is evil incarnate. I share that opinion with Danny 100%. And Danny, with respect to Brett's question about Canada and Europe saving the Ukraine, Danny doesn't know who does, but he says, but he does know that Canada has recognized Palestine as a state. Max is writing, I don't like the rise of anti Semitism, which I prefer to call Jew hatred. He doesn't like this himself. And he does not believe that Israel is responsible for all the evil in the world. And many of these theories are wild, and that is harmful to ordinary people. Yeah, people get, guilt by association. There are individuals who think that anyone who's Jewish is part of the so-called synagogue of Satan. And I've spoken about that before. I do think there are prominent Jewish individuals, the Rothschilds certainly, and Soros, and many more, who have a they're Freemasons. And to me, Freemasonry is the synagogue of Satan. And there are individuals who I will say hide behind their Jewish identity while working in the Masonic shadows to bring about things that are not good for the broader base of humanity. So that's a thought I have had. And while I'm on this stream of consciousness, I'll take a little break and invite everyone watching, if you wouldn't mind hitting the thumb up button, that helps increase the station's visibility. And if you're not subscribed, you're welcome to. Miserable, pathetic station, such as it is, very raw. But I know that some people like raw. They like they don't like lipstick on the pig. Yeah. What you see is what you get. I will tell you that I don't have any strings behind. There are no strings behind my back. No one's pulling my strings. No one's telling me what to say, what I'm allowed to talk about, what I'm not allowed to talk about, that kind of thing. And that is pervasive because I know people in broadcast media, both print and mainstream television media. And oh, yeah, there are things that you are not allowed to talk about. A lot of times it's pretty much benign. I know an individual who was looking to um, do something about CFL light bulbs. The light bulbs, condensed fluorescent light bulbs, they're called CFL, and they're the ones that are supposed to last for years, and they use far less electricity than traditional incandescent bulbs, but they contain mercury in them. And you should read the instructions on what a CFL bulb says if it breaks and there's potential for mercury to be in the air that you can inhale. That ain't good for you. And so you'd be amazed at the cleanup protocol. Get a hazmat bag, that kind of thing. And so this individual that I know personally wanted to do something of an expose on this, and it was kiboshed. And I'm calling that somewhat benign. It's not heinous. It's not in the same league as the Epstein list. But if they'll suppress a story about the hazards associated with breaking a CFL mercury containing light bulb, imagine what else they won't, imagine the other things that will be suppressed at any rate. And then Danny goes on to say that he thinks that Canada is kicking a hornet's nest. They're certainly going to, my view on Canada, recognizing Palestine as a state is going to embolden the free Palestine protesters we've seen taking the streets of major Canadian cities like Toronto, Montreal. I think we're going to see them emboldened. Look, we're winning. And I do believe 100%, absolutely, that the ultimate goal of the Palestinian movement is the total elimination, eradication of the nation state of Israel. I do not believe that Palestinians want a peaceful two-state solution. I believe they want a one-state solution, and that one state is Palestine, and then the Middle East can devolve into what we see happening all the time, and they can beat the crap out of each other, as we've seen in Yemen. Syria is happening now in Sudan. Yes, Sudan is an African nation, but I also included in the Middle East. It's predominantly Islamic, and it's right across the Red Sea from Saudi Arabia. So to me, Sudan is part of the Middle East. And we see what happens in the Middle East constantly. Iran, Iraq fighting a war, Yemen civil war, Syria civil war, Sudan civil war. This notion that, well, if you just get rid of Israel, there will be peace in the Middle East is a canard, is a total fabrication. It would just be more Muslim on Muslim, Islamic on Islamic violence, Shia versus Sunni or whatever. They don't even need Shia Sunni. Shia will fight Shia, Sunni will fight Sunni. It's just, and I don't even want to say that are Muslims worse than anyone else? No, Jews fight against each other. The whole creation of the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, that was the result of a civil war. Jews fight amongst Jews. That's broken, fallen humanity. We're all broken, all fallen, all sinful, and it's only through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross that we are reconciled, that we are made clean, and then we can invite the Holy Spirit in to clean us up. And we invite that Holy Spirit to give us eyes for discernment. At any rate. And Max wants to hear my evolving thoughts, and I want to get to them. It looks like I'm pretty much caught up. Amy's saying it doesn't matter. They are chasing clout, blowing on their nails and polishing them on their suits. The amount of radiation left by all those bombs made the area unlivable for Palestinians. Yeah, it's going to take a decade to make that place livable again. And then Brett saying, isn't it funny how DNC made that one comment, then disappeared? The one comment about talking about me saying drama queen. Anyway, and that is curious. Thank you for liking the stream, Max. And then Danny saying raw and honest is refreshing and appreciating it. Thank you, Danny. One thing is, you don't have to agree with me. And I invite you, I do it regular. I have no issue with people taking exception. Uh, and Brett believes that I am speaking truth about Palestine. Some may disagree. And Danny's saying, I'll say it. Don't like the language, but I'll say it. The Middle East is I'm going to say it. I'll say it. I consider that a mild profanity, shit show. And it is. But then again, look at what we did. Look at what our ancestors did in establishing countries like Canada and the United States. Look at the Trail of Tears. Look at what we did to Louis Riel during the Northwest Rebellion. Look, we all have a log in our eye. And it's so easy to, mount our thrones and pronounce judgment and you're evil and everything. Well, we need to look at the logs in our own eyes. So getting back to Max, wanting to hear my thoughts on Israel. I'm going to read a passage from Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. And this is it. And I need to give the context of this passage. What happened is Joseph, one of Israel, Jacob's 12 sons, was taken by his brothers, thrown into a pit. They took stripped him of his beautiful multicolored robe, Joseph in the amazing Technicolor dream coat. They took away his robe, and then they sold him to a caravan, and he ended up enslaved in Egypt. So his brothers did something undeniably wicked and evil. They took their brother, their brother, and they threw him into a pit. Then they sold him into slavery. Reprehensible what his brothers did. And then many years later, Joseph, we're probably talking 15 years later, 20 years later. I'd have to check the timelines again, but it's something around there. Joseph meets with his brothers. And when he reveals himself to his brothers, the brothers are like, crap, we're dead. Because Joseph had risen to be the second most powerful man, second only to Pharaoh. And now with all this power, he tells his brothers who he is. I'm Joseph. I'm your brother. I'm the one you sold into slavery. And now his brothers are terrified. They think that Joseph is going to probably have them executed. But Joseph says, and I'll actually start a little bit from verse 19, fear not, for am I in the place of God? Am I in God's judgment seat? Fear not, for am I in the place of God? And this is verse 20. As for you, his brothers, who committed an unbelievably wicked, evil act in selling him into slavery, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. I'll read that one more time. Verse 20. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So, what had happened is a famine came into the land of Canaan and Egypt. But Joseph had gone forward into the land of Egypt, had risen to be the second most powerful man in that kingdom, the world's largest and most powerful kingdom to date at that time. And because of that, it preserved life and it preserved God's covenant chosen people, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jacob is Joseph's father. Jacob is also called Israel. And Israel, if anyone's wondering, Israel means to struggle with God. Jacob struggled with God. comforting words for broken, fallen, sinful creatures, because it is a struggle. When you try to follow God, when you try to follow Christ, you struggle. Anyway, so how have my views on Israel changed? A lot of people will make the point that Israel came into being by evil people. Uh, the Rothschilds, for example, are I don't I wouldn't call them the architects, or maybe that you could call them the architects. They were certainly working heavily behind the scenes. They invested heavily in Israel, both before it became a modern nation state and afterward. I believe that they are responsible for funding the building of the Knesset, which is the parliament building in. I'm not sure if the Knesset is physically located in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem. I tend to think it's in Tel Aviv, but regardless, if you're interested, you can check it out and let me know. It's not that big a deal to me. And I do not consider the Rothschilds to be good and virtuous people by and large. I consider them to be part of the Masonic synagogue of Satan, but who call themselves Jews because that they want to represent themselves as Jews, but I don't think they are. I think when you read Revelation, when you read Jesus's message to the church as written of in Revelation, and with Christ saying to beware those who call themselves Jews but are not, but who are part of the synagogue of Satan, I think he's talking about individuals like the Rothschilds and more. Like again, the George Soros types of the world. So Israel came into being. A big major event was the 1917, November of 1917, just months before the First World War ended. Balfour, I think his name is James Balfour, doesn't matter. Balfour, who was the British Minister of Foreign Affairs or Foreign Relations, something like that, former Prime Minister. Balfour, his name was put on a declaration that was made by the British Parliament that said that the British government, the British, would look favorably upon establishing a national homeland for the Jewish people in what was then Ottoman ruled. It was Syria, part of the Syrian district, but they also called it Palestine, and that we'll look favorably upon creating a Jewish national homeland. And to whom did they deliver it? They delivered it to Lord Rothschild, who was a prominent Zionist. And so Rothschild is a Zionist, and Rothschild is evil, ergo Zionism is evil, is the default for a lot of people. And I'm willing to recognize that Rothschild is evil. And I'm willing to recognize that Rothschild was absolutely 100% totally a Zionist. But I'm not willing to go so far as to say that Zionism is evil, is taking your brother and throwing, and getting back to this passage I read, is taking your brother, throwing him into a pit and selling him into a slavery evil? 100%. Absolutely. Totally evil. But can good come out of it? What happened because Joseph went into that pit and got sold into slavery? What happened was that the nation state, not the nation state, but rather the people, the Israeli people, the Israelites were able to survive and thrive. And they were able to multiply enormously while at the same time being somewhat inoculated, cut off, removed from the broader polluting population. We have to remember the world at that time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The world at that time was a polytheistic world where people built stone altars, stone gods to animals, snakes and goats and all manner of things, and they were idolized and worshiped as gods. And God's covenant chosen people from Moses forward had been admonished not to do that. And so we have God's covenant chosen people, the Israelites, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, being inoculated, being sent into or occupying the land of Goshen and occupying a profession, that of shepherds and farmers, which is was the lowest of the low in Egyptian society at the time. And that is both in the Bible and extra biblical. The the Egyptians looked way down. And if you think of the old caste system of India, of the Hindus, and the caste system, the farmers and shepherds were the untouchables. And so that allowed the Israelites to grow as a nation separated from a sinful, idolatrous world. Anyway, let me read what's being said. Uh, Eat Me is saying that I am entering a very slippery YouTube slope. Well, I know that this video, when you say anything bad about masonry, I know that automatically or almost, if that is a major element of a video, then you get that little fact check. Oh, the Masons are wonderful. They do so many good things. And, it's just a fraternal order. And yeah, they do things in secret, but it's basically a nice little men's club. That and that's their view. That's the view they want promoted. It's like the COVID jabs are wonderful, and you'll never get infected. And we know we can prove it's proven that the SARS-CoV-2 virus originated in a bat, and that it jumped from a bat to a human in a wet market in Wuhan, China, just coincidentally right next door to a biolab where were working on coronaviruses, but that's just a coinky dink. Anyway, uh, and then Max is saying, with respect to my drawing something of a parallel between Joseph of Genesis and the creation of the modern nation state of Israel, he's saying that's an interesting interpretation. Joseph's position and application of his dreams and visions would have been impossible if his brothers didn't do that evil act. Yeah, Pharaoh would have had no one to interpret his dream. That the 70 ears of corn and the seven the good ears of corn consuming the bad withered ears of corn. No, it was the other way around. The bad withered ears of corn consuming the good bountiful ears of corn, and the seven sickly cows consuming the seven healthy cows, signaling 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of horrible famine. But if Joseph hadn't been there, no one would have been there to interpret the dream. Egypt wouldn't have been able to store up bounty for the 7 years of plenty. And then Israel and his sons, Jacob and his sons, would have had nowhere to go to get food, and they could have perished. And Max is saying that he agrees with that reading of the Joseph story. And so what I will ask is this. Could God use an evil person like a Rothschild to help create a nation state to provide, I'll call it an incubator for the remnant of his covenant chosen people, who Paul, in his book to the Roman church in chapter 11, informs us that at some future time, all Israel will be saved, and that God has not, even on the other side, on this side of the cross, Paul was writing to the Roman church after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Okay, so it's on the same side of the cross that we are on. And if you just read chapter 11, of the book of Romans, Paul writing to the Roman church, writing about 20 or so years after Jesus' death and resurrection, after Paul met the risen Lord, our risen Lord, on the road to Damascus. And he says, has Israel fallen, been forsaken? Have they stumbled so far as to fall? By no means, Paul says. And so my question is, did and I have no problem, no issue recognizing that Joseph's brothers throwing him into a pit, that's evil. Do I think that Rothschild, the Baron, the Lord Rothschild, whatever his title is, that he created the nation state of Israel for other ulterior motives? Quite possibly, yes. But has God created a situation where he's created something of an incubator? Because it has to be remembered that there's always a remnant. There's always a remnant. Started out as 12 tribes. Dan, Manasseh, Ephraim, I can't remember the name, the Reubenites. You had these 12 tribes. And eventually the kingdom split in two. Assyria conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, and all that was left was a remnant, the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, a remnant. There's always a remnant, but that remnant needs a place to survive, a place to live. I do believe that there are godly Jews living in Israel right now. Is Benjamin Netanyahu one of them? I don't know. I don't sit on the throne of judgment. But if I am forced to give an opinion, I'm going to say I'm leaning toward no. Such a complex issue. It is such a complex issue. My heart goes out to the residents of Gaza, the people living in Gaza. They call themselves Palestinians. Okay, fair enough. I'm not talking about the Hamas fighters. I'm talking about the citizens of Gaza. They are between a rock and a hard place. They're between Hamas and the IDF. And they're cannon fodder on both sides of the equation. And if Israel pulls out, if they grant Palestinian statehood to the people of Gaza, Hamas wins a huge victory. And eventually they can pursue their goal of wiping Israel off the map. Because in their 1988, 88 or 87 Covenant of Hamas, that's their founding charter. It's called the Covenant of Hamas. That is their stated objective, to totally eliminate the nation state of Israel from existence. Let me read on. Max is writing, I think there can only be further conflict can emerge from the situation we're seeing now. I would agree. I've heard some predictions that after Gaza is completely leveled, they will rebuild the second temple, third temple. Or I guess if you're rebuilding it, you're rebuilding the second. But this would be, the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. The second temple was rebuilt by after the Medo-Persians allowed the Israelites to come back. Nehemiah, you read in Nehemiah, Ezra, and they rebuilt the city walls and they rebuilt the temple. And then about 100 years or so before Christ, King Herod, and that became something of a title. Anyone who was regent over Jerusalem and that area of Roman occupied Judea became known as Herod. But Herod didn't rebuild the temple, but refurbished it, tried to bring it back to the glory it had when it was the first temple that had been built by King Solomon. When Ezra and Nehemiah, when the Israelites had restored it, it was a restoration and it wasn't very good. And so Herod came along and he, you know, dressed it up, made it magnificent. And then in AD 70, that second temple was destroyed. And now there's talk about rebuilding the third temple. As a matter of fact, when the October 7th attack happened, and I probably should talk a little bit about that. When the October 7th attack happened, um, Hamas leadership referred to the massacre as the Al Aqsa flood. And Al Aqsa is the name of the mosque. It means the furthest mosque. Al Aqsa is Arabic for the furthest. Uh, they called it the Al Aqsa flood because the Al Aqsa Mosque is located on the Temple Mount, where it is believed that the first and second temples were located. It is also the holiest site in all of Judaism, the third holiest site in Islam, and it was reported that Jews were praying on the Temple Mount, something which has been forbidden by the Jordanians, who are kind of the stewards of the Temple Mount. That's their little, they have kind of jurisdictional stewardship over the Temple Mount. However, the Temple Mount, East Jerusalem is Israeli territory. You talk about complex. Can you imagine Canada ceding part of, saying part of our territory can be administered and stewarded by the French or the British or the Americans, but that's the way the Temple Mount. It's a foreign country that Israel, the modern nation state of Israel, has gone to war with them twice in 1967 and 1973, and they were at war with them back during the first Arab-Israeli war which was from 1948 until 1949. So they've been at war with Jordan 3 times, and yet now they're allowing Jordan to steward and manage their territory on the Temple Mount. I don't get, to be honest, I don't get it. I would imagine it was due to international pressure that Israel said, okay, we'll let Jordan come back in and they can manage the Temple Mount. But then Jews were praying on it ahead of October 7th, and Hamas was what they named their attack on October 7th. It was called the Al Aqsa flood. And Hamas senior leadership put out videos saying that this is just the start. We're taking it all. And YouTube had the videos up, but they took them down because they violate YouTube community standards. Because what Hamas was saying they were going to do is, you're not allowed to say it. It's that heinous. You're not allowed to advocate for things like genocide. But they did. And the big question, and Charlie Kirk, bringing him back into this, openly speculated that on October 7th, could there have been a stand down order? And I do believe once again, 100%, I think it is possible. Absolutely possible. And I think it may even, I think you can argue that it was probable because the, you talk about a David and Goliath struggle in reverse, where the the Israel Defense Force, the IDF, and the surveillance and intelligence apparatus of the nation state of Israel is Goliath compared to Hamas. And the only way that I believe that Hamas could achieve what they achieved on October 7th, 2023, is if Israel stood down their forces, their response. Well, and the excuse we're given is like the excuses for all the failures on 9/11. Well, and I'll say the swear word again, shit happens. Really? On that scale? I think it's rather convenient, especially considering the fact that Israel had been warned. The previous administration, as well as the Netanyahu administration, were warned ahead of time by the Americans and by other international and their own intelligence services that Hamas was planning an attack exactly as what happened on that day. They were warned ahead of time that this is going to happen, and they said, no, it's impossible. And you know what? If their security apparatus had operated properly, it was impossible. And so, why would Israel do that? Why? Let's making the assumption that there was a stand down order. What would be the rationale? Why would you give a victory to Hamas? Why? And I would suggest, and this is what I believe that they gave a victory to Hamas in order to win a much larger objective. And that much larger objective was to prevent Iran and her proxy forces, Hezbollah, Houthis, the Hamas, preventing them from getting strong enough to eventually achieve their ultimate aim of wiping Israel off the map. But without a pretext, without a justification, they could not eliminate that threat. And I think Israel's fear, I think their fear was that if we wait another year, another 2, another 3 years, that sometime in the very near future, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iran, Islamic Jihad, that these groups are going to grow stronger and stronger, and eventually they will threaten our very existence. We need to take them out. But how can we take them out? How? We don't have justification to take them out. If they got a victory against us, if they committed horrible, heinous attacks, like what the Americans tell us they're planning, what our own security and intelligence agencies say they're planning, and I imagine, just a guess on my part, that Israel has intelligence agents embedded within senior levels of Hamas, of Hezbollah, of the Houthis, that they have individuals who are compromised, who are working on their behalf. And they can even direct things potentially, depending on how senior, what type of, how high up the totem pole, to use a politically incorrect reference, how high up in Hamas leadership they have compromised individuals. Everything's kind of tying together. Do you think the honeypot schemes are only used to entrap Hollywood moguls and politicians? What about your enemy? What about the military of your enemy? So, anyway, let's read on, and then we're getting into the. I'm just trying to catch up to where I was. All right, I've got Max saying there's an esoteric idea from Latin, ordo ab chao, or order from chaos, which is also a motto of the 33 degree of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. As above, so below. Order from chaos. Yeah. Danny's writing that the Masons worship Satan, that they are satanic. That is my belief. They follow Luciferian light. They look upon Lucifer as the god of enlightenment. And Max is saying there's tons of chaos right now, and there is. And it's that old, when things are muddling along, when things are working, even if they're not working 100% well, it's hard to affect serious and fundamental change because there's a resistance. People resist change. And so the only way you can bring about serious and fundamental, and I'll even go so far as to say radical change, that you need a crisis. And it's been suggested by people far smarter than me that the way, If a crisis doesn't present itself, well, then create one. Create a crisis so that you can bring about a fundamental radical change that you wanted to bring about anyway. And most people, they look at something like COVID and they say, well, yes, they did take advantage of an organic event. That COVID just happened organically. It's one of these things. It just happened. There was no conspiracy. It wasn't like they were planning out how they would react to this beforehand. Oh wait, yeah, they did that. They had a scenario like that. Well, never mind that. They just got lucky with that little run through tabletop exercise that they planned. But yeah, and yes, they did overreach and they did take advantage of the situation, but COVID occurred organically. I don't agree, but anyway, let's read on. And then Danny, God can choose whomever he wishes to do his bidding. We read further in that Joseph story that God hardened Pharaoh's heart so that he could win a victory over him. God wanted to display his majesty, his might, his supremacy. He didn't want everyone saying, "Oh, the reason that Pharaoh let the Hebrew slaves go is because good old soft-hearted Pharaoh, he's just a good guy. He did it." No, God wanted to show his power, might, and majesty over the world's preeminent, most powerful nation at the time. Remember that when the Hebrews fled out of bondage into the desert, that God led them where? Did he lead them straight to the promised land? No. God led them to a point where they were doomed. He led them to the edge of a sea, to the edge of Yam Suf, sometimes translated as the Red Sea, sometimes translated as the Sea of Reeds. I don't care which one is right. All that we know is that the Israelites, the Hebrews, were pushed right a place with no escape. And the only thing that could rescue them was the hand of providence, the hand of God. God put them right into the worst possible situation if you look at it through earthly eyes. Oh my God, what kind of God is this? He put them right up against the sea. They're doomed. And God's like, "Oh, you think you're doomed? You think you're so fallen, broken, and sinful that you can never be reconciled to me? Here's my son." Same idea. Anyway, uh, Eat Me is bringing up the fact that we're entering the period. I believe is it today or tomorrow? It's right around now, something called the Feast of Trumpets, which is coincides. It's equally called Rosh Hashanah. It's the Jewish New Year, not Jewish. So I'm not sure on the exact days, but a day in Judaism starts at sundown. Doesn't We start the day at midnight when the sun's disappeared, and then the next day starts in Judaism and also in Islam, incidentally. The day starts when the sun goes down. That signals the start of a new day. So Saturday starts Friday at what for the rest of the world is sundown Friday night. So when the sun goes down. So I'm not sure, but it's right around 22nd, 23rd, the Feast of Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah, and they're going to celebrate all the red heifer that were sacrificed to the third Jewish temple. There is a sacrifice spoken of in the book of Numbers. It is said that before the temple can be dedicated, that the ashes from a red heifer mixed with hyssop and some other things has to be sprinkled on both the temple and the people, and it's very involved. And I don't know if the red heifer has been sacrificed now already, or if not, but they do have red heifers, 3 or 4 of them. And the red heifer has to be reddish in color with no blemish, not a single white hair or black hair. It's got to be completely red. Maybe it can have, it's difficult to read, but it has to be basically perfect. And they imported from an evangelical Christian in Texas, raised heifers that would qualify. They were exported. They were sent to Israel. They're being cared for near the area of Shiloh, which was the site of the first temple, but when it was a tabernacle, when it was the tent of meeting, the tabernacle with, the Holy of Holies. It was a very large, ornate structure, massive structure, which incidentally, if anyone wants to look into this, Pharaoh's tent that he would go out to when he went to war. Pharaoh had a tent, and the structure of Pharaoh's war tent is basically a mirror image of what Moses instructed the Hebrews to build in the desert during their 40 years of wandering. I throw that out there. Max is writing, that's right. Construction of the third temple is a necessary event for the return of Christ, Jesus. There will also be the rise of false Christs and false prophets who will deceive many people. And I think we have seen false Christs and false prophets throughout history. Muhammad, false prophet. Joseph Smith, false prophet. And I don't care if that's offensive. That's what I believe. Not angry or hateful to those who have, in my eyes, been deceived. Still love my Islamic friends, still love my Mormon friends, although I don't think I know any Mormons anymore. I used to, but I don't think I know any anymore. But I know I have known a number of Latter-day Saints who are wonderful people, and I have known Muslims, and I still know Muslims who are wonderful people. But I do believe that they are following both groups, Mormons and Muslims, that they are following false prophets. But I think we're going to see a ramping up, the birth pangs. We're going to see more and more and more as the day draws near. Then Max says, by their fruits you shall know them. And then Eat Me is writing to Max Power, even red heifers were genetically engineered to accelerate the prophecy when the breed did not exist anymore. So whose Messiah is going to come back, the Christian or the Jewish one? And Eat Me saying that's the question. The interesting thing is, the Jewish Messiah that they were expecting 2,000 years ago. The Jews in first century Roman occupied Judea were expecting a militaristic Messiah. They were expecting someone like Judas Maccabees, who had led the revolt and defeated the Seleucid Greek Empire and restored Jewish rule, Jewish autonomous rule. That's what they expected of a Messiah. They did not expect Jesus, the suffering servant, as prophesied by Isaiah in Isaiah 53:54. They didn't expect what Jesus was. They wanted someone to take, swords and let's go and defeat the Romans. They didn't get what they wanted. And I believe that at the second coming, that is when the remnant of the Jewish people, the tiny little portion that are left, who have been incubated in the nation state of Israel by perhaps some evil players, that's my belief, that at that point, this remnant will then bow the knee, confess with their tongues, and recognize that Jesus was the Christ 2,000 years ago, and he is the Christ now. He's the Christ forevermore. He was there at the beginning. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Jesus was there in the beginning. I'm reading from or I'm reciting what's at the very beginning of the book of John. Max is saying that he believes it will lead to massive religious conflict. Well, that's what's prophesied. The world's nations are going to be surrounding Israel. Now we have Canada, the UK, and Australia all joining in, recognizing Palestine. We've got Turkey and Erdogan, who's been rattling his sword, talking about trying to marshal support among Islamic communities throughout the world. And of course, we have Iran. They've been bloodied, but they're not defeated. And so, are we going to, and then you have to remember, of course, that Iran is allied with Russia. Russia is still dealing with the Ukraine, so they're somewhat distracted. But if that situation comes to an end, then Russia can change its focus. And I believe it's prophesied. So, as a professing Bible believing Christian, it's going to happen. The world's nations are going to surround Israel. And now we're talking about the Battle of Megiddo, the Battle of Armageddon. Um, and that is when Christ returns. So, are we going? There's a lot of talk about September 22nd, 23rd, about the Feast of Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah, and there's talk of the rapture. I've already said many videos. I do not believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. I believe that the rapture is one and the same with the second coming, as spoken of by Jesus in Matthew 24, and as mentioned by Paul in 2 Thessalonians. The dead in Christ rise first. There'll be a loud trumpet call. The dead in Christ rise first. Those who have fallen asleep, they go to meet Jesus in the clouds, and then those of us who are still alive will be gathered up, and then we, and then come. That is the second coming. It's not a pre-tribulation event, in my opinion. Now, if we are heading to a period of 7 years of horrific times and war and famine and all this other stuff, and with the last 3.5 of it being even worse than the first 3.5, do I want to be beamed out of here before that happens? Absolutely. Who wouldn't want to be? But we are called to endure. We are called to endure. And there are Christians around the world who are having to endure some horrific things in places like Syria, in places like China. Christians are being murdered all around the world, and they're having to endure. And if being, murdered isn't a time of tribulation, I don't know what is. Danny says that certain things have to happen first, and that if they haven't happened first, if anyone comes claiming to be the savior, that they're an antichrist, and that he gets a feeling it will be Elon, the Elon or Elon, introducing himself into the world. Elon with his Neuralink. Talking about AI and biodigital convergence and transhumanism and all the evil that's percolating in the world. And then Eatme's writing that I keep telling people that any prophecy can be accelerated for a political gain. Just producing those red heifers was a sign that something is brewing up. And then she goes on to say that the stuff, it passes under the radar. Max is agreeing with that. Very true. Then Nancy says, how long did it take to catch Charlie's so-called unaliver? 33 hours. Yeah. And there's a passage from, I think it's the Gospel according to John, where it said something to the effect of, unless the corn dies, that nothing can happen. But once it dies and falls into the ground, then it multiplies. And that's being used as a metaphor for Charlie Kirk's unaliving, saying that now that he's died, there's been this huge explosion. Good things can happen out of evil. I've often said, a rose bush can grow out of a pile of manure. We shall see, but we need to keep eyes open and don't follow blindly. And then Eat Me further says, how many Epstein files? 33,000. 33,000. That number pops up everywhere if you pay attention. And then, I think that's the highest degree in Scottish Rite Freemasonry, 33rd degree. And that's the way Freemasonry operates. It's like when you get to the highest degrees, that's when you see the fullest picture. When you have lower degree individuals who, if you're in the first 3 degrees, you think the Masons are wonderful. Oh, we're funding a burn unit for a hospital, or we're funding research into leukemia or whatever. We're doing all wonderful things. You have to get higher into the organization before you realize that, oh my God, this is evil. And by that time, it's too late. I openly wonder if Charlie Kirk, perhaps in his youth, idealistic, somewhat naive, not to say, and naive does not mean smart, or it doesn't mean hmm, you can be naive and be highly intelligent. You can be naive and be highly intelligent. It's just a matter, when you're 17, 18 years of age, like Charlie Kirk was when he started Turning Point, yeah, I can imagine he was overwhelmed with the individuals who were coming up to him and offering to fill his bank account and help grow his new nascent organization and give him the financing and the tools and the advice that he needed to do things so they could grow this massive organization. But my question is, was there a cost? And they say, yeah, it's like what I talk about again. I love going back to The Godfather, Bonacera, the Undertaker. He wanted something. He wanted a favor from, oh, okay, but nothing comes without a cost. Nothing comes without a cost. And then, there's open speculation. We got to wait and find out. We need the trial to happen. We need this Tyler Robinson to go before a jury, or uh, they televised the living crap out of the O.J. Simpson trial. Well, televise the crap out of this. I want to see it. I watched the arraignment hearing, I guess you would call it, where he was basically stood by video link and he was told all the charges that were being brought against him and told that he's been found indigent and capable of paying for a lawyer and that the court's going to appoint a lawyer for him. And he just sat there very stoic, just, there were barely discernible head nods. If you didn't watch carefully, you'd almost think that he was catatonic or that you were just looking at a still picture. And he barely blinked a couple times. But it was so subtle. And I don't think he said even one, he might have said one word. I think there was one little exchange where he gave a basic affirmation, but he didn't say anything. So we'll find out. Um, Danny's writing that it's not Muslims that are the problem, that it's Islam. Yeah. So again, looking at the log in our own eye, in the Christian world, we have Joel Osteen calls himself a Christian. Joel Osteen and Kenneth Copeland. And before them, it was Jimmy Swaggart and Jim Baker. Yeah. So uh, anyway, Hillary had 33,000 emails. Max saying, I have a bad feeling they will use these crises. I think that's the entire. Yeah, I agree with you. Crisis will enable them to say, well, we have to completely overhaul the system. We got to tear it down and rebuild. And this crisis, we didn't have anything to do with it, but now that it's here, we got to deal with it. And the only way we can deal with it is to tear things down and to build back better. We will be told, you remember that during COVID, we're going to build back better. All of a sudden, everyone like Boris Johnson and Mark Carney, or not Mark Carney, but Justin Trudeau and Joe Biden and every political figure in the world all started talking about how we're going to build back better, as if they just came up with it on their own, that it hadn't been scripted and handed to them. This is what you're going to say. Build back better, build back better, build back better. Reel it into the subconscious mind of that dumbed down, stupid population in all your countries. Oh, we're building back better. We're building back better. You repeat something often enough, and people just, oh, well, they're building back better. This is going to be good. No, it ain't. Um, And then Max goes on to say that Mark Carney also has very suspicious ties to these organizations. Digital ID, oh yeah, Alberta has already brought in a digital ID, voluntary if you choose to use it. You don't have to. But then Well, we're going to make it harder and harder to operate without it. And that's Alberta, which is seen as the bastion of freedom and liberty in Canada. And yet they're the first ones bringing out digital ID. They're calling it a wallet, your government wallet or something like that. Uh, and then Max Power is remembering the scene when Don Corleone called in his favor on Bonacera. And he said, I want you to use all your power, all your skills. I don't want his mother to see him this way after Sonny had been gunned down at the New Jersey Turnpike. Oh, yeah. And yeah, that movie, favorite of all time. And then Danny is saying that chapter 9 of the Quran, what they call a surah, basically, it's just an Arabic word that means chapter. Surah 9 calls to unalive all the infidels, which is in Islamic ideology, I am an infidel, and also to unalive anyone who does not believe in Allah, who does not believe in. But Allah is merely the Arabic word for God, and I'm willing, like the French call God Dieu. You know that. So does that mean that the French do not worship God? They worship Dieu? Anyway, uh, it's just that there are 4 or 5 pillars of Islam. And one of them is there is no God but Allah. There is no God but God. And Muhammad was his prophet. Now, they also claim that Jesus was a prophet, but it makes no sense because they deny the resurrection. So, well, wait a minute, you deny the resurrection, but Jesus prophesied his death and resurrection. A wicked and evil generation, a wicked, evil, and adulterous generation seeks a sign, but no sign shall be given to it except for the sign of Jonah. For just as Jonah was 3 days in the belly of the great fish, so too the Son of Man will be 3 days buried in the earth, and on the third day he will rise again. He prophesies they will deliver the Son of Man up. He will be crucified. He will die. He will be buried, and he will rise again on the third day. Repeatedly in the Gospels, Jesus prophesizes his death and resurrection. And Islam says that it acknowledges Jesus as a prophet, but then they deny his prophecy because they deny the resurrection. Uh, And then Danny goes on to write that many anti-Christian and anti-Jewish remarks throughout the Quran. There are. And if you read the Quran from front to back, it's somewhat chronological. And at the beginning of the Quran, that's where you hear that Jews and Christians are part of the book and we're be nice to them. And Muslims love to point to those early passages in the Quran. And that's because they were from what Muhammad was teaching early in his career as a warlord, and he needed Jewish and Christian support. But then, as his power grew, he didn't need Jewish and Christian support anymore. So all of a sudden, his pronouncements became far more violently inflammatory against Christians and Jews. So, and something is bull crap. Uh, and then Danny goes on to say, yeah, digital ID, not mandatory until it is. We were told that no one will be forced to take the COVID vaccine. We're not going to engage in any, coercion. We're not going to force anyone. And then, well, do you want to work? You want to participate in society? You want to take your kid to hockey? You want to sit down and have a cup of coffee? Well, then I guess we are forcing you. But then Trudeau turned around and said, well, no one was forced. Yeah, my ass. Anyway, sorry for the light expletive deleted right there at the end. So I'll clean it up by ending with the blessing I like to end my videos with. Thank you, everyone, for showing up. I enjoyed the discussion tonight. Max, Danny, Nancy, uh, anyone else? I think it was just mainly the three of us. Brett, of course, Max Power, and we had a brief DNC Productions showed up for one comment. And anyway, I'll leave it there. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. And may the Lord God Almighty, creator of all things, may he grant you and me, may he grant all of us peace. And then Max enjoyed the stream and called Trudeau the ultimate gaslighter. No kidding. And with respect to DNC Productions or whatever that username was, he's saying, I wouldn't be surprised if there are bots monitoring what's going on in these streams. Probably that's the world we live in. And that's okay. I'm going to continue. I'm just going to continue doing what I've been doing. So God bless you as well, Max. Thank you. And we'll see y'all when I do my next one. Not sure when it's going to be. Might be tomorrow. Anyway, talk to you later. Night.